Alright, I say things are now appropriately spooky.
I agree and I approve.
Heck yeah, it looks like you got a nice little spooky vibe over there too.
Of course I do.
But...
What's wrong? Is something out of place over here? Can't have anything out of place.
No, I mean everything looks fine, but...
But what? The little dangly bats and ghosts and pumpkins look perfect. The jack-o'-lanterns are pretty classic if you ask me. What's the problem?
Well, a few years ago you built the entire bridge of the Enterprise D. A couple of years ago you had that whole witchy thing going on. Kinda looks like you went a little minimalist this time.
Hey, minimalism is in this year.
Wait, it is?
That's what Decorating Enema Offices for Halloween Monthly said.
Oh, okay. So anyway, wait. There's a magazine called Decorating Enema Offices for Halloween Monthly?
Yeah, there's a magazine for everything these days.
These days?
Yup.
What days? The days of 1980?
Look, in this week's issue of There's a Magazine for Everything Illustrated, it said there was a magazine for everything these days.
Oh, okay, well that sounds about right. Wait. That's a weekly publication?
Yeah.
Really?
You'd be surprised what they have to write about every week.
I really would be. Oh, yeah, you're right. We have a show to do. Welcome to another episode of B-Movie Enema, the series. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, and that over there is Nurse Disembody. Let me go get the movie for this kind of special episode. I'll be right back to explain.
I wonder what we'll be watching this week.
Well, Poop Shoot and I got to talking the other day. You're damn right, Poop Shoot. It was fun closing down that bar.
You guys went out drinking? When?
The other night.
What other night? You didn't invite me? I think I'm offended.
Yeah, it was a guy's night. Anyway, we were talking about how just the other day, on October 3rd, it was the 10th anniversary of B-Movie Enema. The very first review was posted, which was the Eerie Midnight Horror Show, and since that was pretty much the start of a run for a website that basically serves as my own personal therapy, just to let my own id run wild. But Poop Shoot had an idea for what movie to feature for this 10th anniversary special. Apropos of B-Movie Enema being my therapy of sorts, and the often kind of off-kilter business that goes on in my brain sometimes, we're going to watch 1972's Asylum.
Is it about an insane asylum?
In a way, yes. This comes from Amicus Productions. Now, Amicus was the other horror studio making big production value or classy looking and feeling horror films at the same time Hammer Film Productions were. Amicus was known for two things. First, much like with Hammer, they often worked with the same people, and often borrowed people from the more famous and a little higher budgeted Hammer films. Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing were often going back and forth between Amicus and Hammer films. The other thing Amicus became very well known for, especially in the 70s, were their portmanteau films. These were anthology movies. Their first was Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, followed by Torture Garden, The House That Dripped Blood, their two EC Comics adaptations, Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror, and From Beyond the Grave. Now, Tales from the Crypt was released in 1972, the same year as our movie this week, Asylum. Now, while several other of their films were either set in or starring British actors, Amicus was the brainchild of two American producers and screenwriters, Milton Subotsky and Max Rosenberg. Probably their biggest get was early on in the film company's existence when they got the opportunity to make two Doctor Who theatrical films, Doctor Who and the Daleks and Daleks Invasion Earth 2150 AD. This was during the time in which Terry Nation, the creator of the Daleks, was shopping the monsters around for their own spin-off opportunities. Peter Cushing played the Doctor in those films and went literally by the name Doctor Who, and was just kind of a silly old human inventor of sorts instead of the much more mysterious, lore-filled television counterpart. In fact, we're going to see Peter Cushing later in this movie. Well, Nurse?
Well, Jeff?
Let's check ourselves into the Dunsmore Asylum for the incurably insane and tremble in the fear of 1972's Asylum.
The real criminally insane in this movie is whoever's doing the hairstyling. Lock 'em up!
It's a very early 70s British hairdo type of movie.
Boy, howdy.
Now, right out of the gate, we're already seeing some fairly recognizable folks in the movie. In the framing story, we meet Dr. Martin, who has arrived at the asylum to take a post as a doctor on staff. And he's played by Robert Powell. Now, Powell, for the better part of the last 20 years, mostly does narrating of documentaries. However, a few years before Asylum, he appeared in The Italian Job with Michael Caine. He then appeared in a couple of Ken Russell films, playing composer Gustav Mahler, and then playing Captain Walker in Tommy. He then later portrayed Jesus in a 4-part miniseries appropriately titled Jesus of Nazareth. The warden of the hospital is extremely recognizable.
Are we sure he's not an inmate running the asylum?
You know, it is always hard to tell with Patrick McGee, but hold on to that thought for later, Nurse.
I'm holding on to it.
So yeah, Patrick McGee. I can't ever really think of McGee without thinking of him as this curmudgeon or surly old fart. But he's got all sorts of film credits, particularly in horror with Dementia 13, The Mask of Red Death, Die Monster Die. He also appeared in Tales from the Crypt and Now the Screaming Starts for Amicus around the time of this movie. And then later in Fulci's The Black Cat near the very end of his life. However, it was 2 appearances, first in 1971's A Clockwork Orange and then 1975's Barry Lyndon, that he's probably most recognizable to cinephiles, especially in A Clockwork Orange, where he plays an incredibly pivotal role. Alex and his droogs attack McGee and McGee's wife in the film in a particularly vicious attack that leads to the rape and murder of McGee's character's wife. When Alex shows back up at McGee's house after Alex's state-sanctioned brainwashing struggles to keep him on the path of the righteous, McGee's character opts to push him over the edge as a way to kind of fight back against the cruel authoritarian government that would see what they did to Alex as proper rehabilitation, only to really harm the kid in other ways. McGee passed away at the age of 60 in 1982. He was sadly a heavy drinker, and it caused him to suffer a massive heart attack. That alcoholism mixed with a gambling addiction often hurt him with having sufficient income, and it also sometimes created issues with him with professional relationships. But that said, he was very highly thought of as an actor, and he was particularly left-wing in his politics and often spoke out and fought for humanitarian causes. This also meant that he played a pretty major part in his union boycotting South Africa over apartheid.
I don't think I'd want to go up against him with that scowl he always has on his face.
Oh, most definitely not. Now, I mentioned that Amicus produced film versions based on EC Comics, Tales from the Crypt, and Vault of Horror, right?
Yeah.
This movie is very much structured like one of those old horror anthology comics. Now, of course, the main difference is I'm sure not many of those anthology series really had much of a true framing story, but in a way they often did. In the comics, you'd have like the Crypt Keeper, Or in DC's horror series, House of Mystery and House of Secrets, Cain and Abel, they would be doing something for a page and then they'd give the introduction to that to each of the stories. But sometimes it would circle back around at the end of the comic, and all of those ones, those single page setups or single frame setups for the introductions of each stories, they would ultimately tell a framing story. But in this movie, we have characters going from room to room to find someone who we'll see more about in this story later on. But because this is a movie, they do need to have a little more dialogue and whatnot to set up the movie and all the stories that we're going to see.
And I love this first story.
Yeah, Frozen Fear is the title of the first story in this anthology.
I always hoped to someday find a man who would give me one of those big-ass freezers as a gift. I can't think of anything more perfect for an anniversary or Christmas or birthday. Whoever did that would instantly get into my pants that night.
You really do have a thing for large freezers and other appliances, huh?
You know it.
Everybody's got their own thing, I guess. Anyway,
this story is great. I love the sound effects of the body parts moving around, and I actually laughed out loud when the bass drum played when the torso and boobs moved forward. It was just great. I appreciate a little slapstick in horror, and I appreciate it even more when it all still spooks me.
For sure. I also like the line, "I have another surprise, this!" and then the guy kills the lady with the axe.
I see what you mean. This does play a little like the Tales from the Crypt TV show with a little sense of humor to it, or like one of those old horror comic books.
Frozen Fear is the story of the unhappily married Walter and Ruth. Walter needs to get rid of Ruth so that he can be with Bonnie. Now, Bonnie was played by Barbara Parkins. She was already a fairly recognizable face in America. From 1964 to 1969, she was Betty Anderson on the primetime soap opera Peyton Place. In 1967, she was Anne in Valley of the Dolls. She appeared in 3 issues of Playboy in 1967, 1970, and 1976. I like her. I think she is rather pretty. Her eyes are so dark brown that they kind of come off as hauntingly dark and kind of spooky.
You do like spooky chicks.
I do. I really, really do. Now, Walter was played by Richard Todd. Todd was an Academy Award nominee for Best Actor for the 1949 movie The Hasty Heart.
It's his hasty heart that led to him trying to kill his wife and dismember her for a new chick.
Sure was. Todd would appear in movies for Alfred Hitchcock and Otto Preminger. Interestingly, he would show up in a movie made by Sidney J. Furie in 1962. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because it's connected to another name we've heard a lot this year on B-Movie Enema, the series, Lindsay Shonteff. Shonteff had Todd in his 1977 Bond ripoff, Number 1 for the Secret Service. He also made a movie in the 50s with Ralph Thomas, who made the Bulldog Drummond movies we watched on the show.
I was worried I would have to dismember you and shove you into a big-ass freezer if we were going to watch another Lindsay Shonteff movie.
Yeah, I think we've retired him for a while.
Good.
Todd's Walter is married to Ruth, played by Sylvia Sims. Sims was dubbed the Grand Dame of British cinema and was a pretty big star for about a decade. Sims racked up an impressive 64-year career and was mostly known for dramas. But that said, she was in a 1989 Doctor Who serial called Ghostlight, which was one of the final serials of the classic Who era. Alright, I think we do well getting back into the movie.
I agree.
Now, because of the structure of this anthology, we're going to stick with the movie for a little longer than we normally do and look at 2 stories. But yeah, I know. Don't be too disappointed, viewers, that you're not going to see this mug for a bit. But in these 2 stories, the most recognizable faces of the movie will be seen, and it's very possible these are the names used most to sell the movie. So when we come back in about 40 minutes or so, we will talk about these stories and, more importantly, the likes of Peter Cushing, Britt Eklund, and Charlotte Rampling.
Did that 3rd story have the Reverend Mother from Dune?
Sure did. That was Charlotte Rampling. Let's start with her because I'm a fan of hers. Rampling got her start as a teenager on stage and then went into modeling. And it's kind of funny that she's the other half of the two personalities that are portrayed by her and the sex symbol Britt Eklund, who in real life, shortly after this movie, will soon be a Bond girl. I'll talk more about that here in a moment. But I actually kind of prefer Rampling in looks. Anyway, by her early 20s, Rampling would be working quite a bit, including an uncredited role in A Hard Day's Night starring the Beatles. She was working in Italian movies like Sardinia Kidnapped with Franco Nero before things really kicked off for her in the 70s. She had a small part in the British version of the movie Vanishing Point. Now, she didn't appear in the American version, but it still helped her get noticed. And after appearing in this film, she went on to appear in the John Boorman mindfuck of a movie, Zardoz, with Sean Connery.
Jeff, are you ever going to make good on recreating that Sean Connery outfit from Zardoz?
You know, I only have a few viewers, nurse.
So?
Well, I don't want to lose any over a red diaper.
But you could gain so many more by doing that.
I'll consider it.
That's the spirit.
Now, Rampling would go on to appear in Orca with Richard Harris, the Philip Marlowe movie Farewell My Lovely, Woody Allen's Stardust Memories, and Sidney Lumet's The Verdict with Paul Newman. In this tale, Lucy comes to stay. Rampling's Barbara has a friend named Lucy. Lucy is a wild one who often acts sort of like an X Factor to Barbara. And Lucy is Britt Eklund. Now, Eklund came from Sweden and was a very pretty woman who scored several roles in the early to mid-60s. Now, she was married for 4 years to Peter Sellers, and Sellers, as legend has it, fell victim to love at first sight after seeing a picture of her in the newspaper and then sought out trying to meet her. And this ended up becoming a whirlwind romance by all accounts. And he was kind of in a bad place at the time, though, and shortly after they married, he had a series of heart attacks, and eventually they did divorce on the grounds of cruelty toward her by Sellers, and he did not contest it. That's a whole story in and of itself, but Eklund would go on to have a domestic partnership with Rod Stewart and influenced the #1 song of 1977, Tonight's the Night. She even recorded a bit of dialogue in that song that was spoken in French. Right around this time, Eklund would make some pretty memorable movies. In 1972, with Asylum, she appeared in What the Peeper Saw, a thriller about a boy falling in love with his stepmother. Then, in 1973, came her most famously beloved role in the genre as Willow in The Wicker Man. To a larger audience, Eklund would become Mary Goodnight in Roger Moore's second Bond film, The Man with the Golden Gun. While it was her highest profile movie, sadly, it wouldn't really do all that well for her. Unfortunately, she's outshined by Maude Adams in the movie because Adams had a role that was kind of sympathetic, and Goodnight was kind of a bumbling bimbo of sorts. Then you had Moore establishing himself as Bond after a successful first go-around, and going up against Christopher Lee as an interesting villain with a memorable, diminutive henchman. Eklund should have stood out, but ended up kind of getting squeezed out. Still, she's a Bond girl. Also in this segment, we have James Villiers, who plays Barbara's brother George. Now, we've seen Villiers before as Carl Peterson in that second Bulldog Drummond film, Some Girls Do. Interestingly, Villiers also found his way into a Bond film when he portrayed Bill Tanner in For Your Eyes Only. Tanner is a character often used in Ian Fleming's novels and seen in several films since 1995's GoldenEye. In the older films, the character of Tanner appeared in the 1981 For Your Eyes Only film after his first appearance in the Bond series in The Man with the Golden Gun, though in that, he's played by actor Michael Goodliffe.
Lucy Comes to Stay has that good old-fashioned twist at the end. I like the idea of the split personality.
Yeah, that is pretty good. I mean, you can see it coming a mile away because it's vitally important to Lucy that Barbara not take any medications, but whatever. I liked it. I also like the weird Taylor.
I feel like if you find yourself in a situation where you have to have a lot of money very quickly, and Peter Cushing comes in to get help from you for a very specific yet mysterious reason and promises you a lot of money, I feel like that would set off a lot of warning bells.
Yeah, I would think so too, but Peter Cushing, I mean, man, I'm not sure what else I could really ever say about him that others haven't already. Cushing's career began in 1935 on stage at the Connaught Theatre in Worthing. In a story that almost sounds too fantastical to be true, once Cushing got the bug to appear in films, his father sent him to Hollywood on a one-way ticket. Once there, Cushing only had 50 pounds and had to basically get on with making connections as soon as possible. Soon he appeared in a bit part in 1939's The Man in the Iron Mask. During the Second World War, Cushing returned to England, but didn't enter the war. Instead, he performed for the troops. He had some childhood injuries that made him unsuitable for battle. But as the Entertainment's National Service Association, Cushing continued to hone his craft. Following the war, Sir Laurence Olivier sought Cushing out for the role of Osric in 1948's Hamlet. The film won the Oscar for Best Picture, Olivier won the Oscar for Best Actor, and Cushing won praise for his performance. Less than a decade later, he would get his first lead role as Victor Frankenstein in Hammer's The Curse of Frankenstein. A year later, he played Van Helsing in Hammer's next Gothic monster film, Dracula. Both films, he was opposite Christopher Lee, a man he'd go on to appear in over 20 films in the course of 35 years. The first was Hamlet, and that was followed by John Huston's Moulin Rouge. In 1977, Peter Cushing, along with Academy Award winner Alec Guinness, added some name value to the movie that would change the world, Star Wars. Nurse.
Never heard of Star Wars.
I wasn't going to ask. You know what Star Wars is.
Says you.
Yeah, anyway, what I was going to ask, did you know that Peter Cushing was the original choice of John Carpenter for the role of Dr. Loomis in Halloween?
I did not know that.
Yeah, but Cushing turned down the film. Then Christopher Lee was approached, but he also turned it down.
But I think we should be thankful that it went to Donald Pleasance. He's perfect for Dr. Loomis.
Yeah, he most definitely is. I would feel like Cushing would be too frail as Loomis, and Lee would be too imposing. I would expect Michael Myers to utterly massacre Cushing and be massacred by Lee. Like Goldilocks, right? Like Pleasance was just right.
Agreed.
Now, before we get into the final story in this portmanteau movie from Amicus, we need to make sure to talk about the Weird Tailor himself, Bruno, played by Barry Morse. Morse appeared on TV shows like The Untouchables, The Twilight Zone, The Alfred Hitchcock Hour, and The Outer Limits. That said, his most popular role by far was as Lieutenant Philip Gerard, the dogged police detective in hot pursuit of Dr. Richard Kimball, otherwise known to TV viewers all across the United States, The Fugitive. The Fugitive TV series was quite popular and ended up winning the 1966 Primetime Emmy for Outstanding Drama Series. When it was remade as a film starring Harrison Ford in 1993, it was nominated for Best Picture, and Tommy Lee Jones took home the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor playing Gerard. The role originated by Barry Morse.
Well, ain't that something?
Indeed. Now, Morse would continue to appear in popular TV series and miniseries like the mid-70s sci-fi series Space 1999 and the miniseries The Martian Chronicles, and then later War and Remembrance. Okay, I think we need to get into the final story and the big conclusion of Asylum.
Let's get to it.
Let's indeed. And how else do you wrap up a creepy movie with a cast of creepy characters? With creepy dolls.
How did he pick up that scalpel? Is that Chucky's grandpa?
Yes.
Wait, really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Bullshit.
For real, everyone knows that Asylum is a secret prequel to Child's Play.
No way.
Yes way. Anyway, let's talk about who makes those creepy dolls.
No. We're not gonna move right past that business about Chucky's grandpa.
So, the doll maker is played by Herbert Lom. Now, Lom was born in Prague in 1917, near the very end of the Austria-Hungary Empire. Lom appeared in over 100 films and TV shows. He appeared in 1955's The Lady Killers with Alec Guinness and Peter Sellers. He was in Kubrick's Spartacus. He was the Phantom in the 1962 Hammer Films production of The Phantom of the Opera. But, without a doubt, he's best known as the long-suffering Chief Inspector Dreyfus in most of the Pink Panther films. Though he did not appear in the original film, he did appear in the sequel, A Shot in the Dark. In all, he played the part of Dreyfus 7 times between 1964 and 1993. So anyway, Lom's Dr. Byron projects his psyche into one of his dolls and uses it to kill Warden Rutherford. It tries to kill Dr. Martin, but Martin snuffs the doll and by extension Byron by stomping on the doll. But Martin is not out of the woods yet. The orderly who's been showing Martin around, Max Reynolds, he's actually Dr. Starr, the former head of the asylum, who has gone insane and murderous. Remember if you asked me if the patients are running the asylum, nurse?
Yeah, I guess I'm a psychic or something. I'm now predicting you're gonna do the Zardos outfit for Halloween.
In your dreams, nurse. Dr. Starr ends up killing Dr. Martin and welcomes the next potential new doctor into the asylum. Our director for this movie was Roy Ward Baker, and he made several movies and worked on several TV shows. In 1958, he made the film A Night to Remember about the ill-fated maiden voyage of the HMS Titanic. But by the mid-60s, he started working heavily with Hammer. He made Quatermass in the Pit, and then The Vampire Lovers, Scars of Dracula, Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, and The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires. For Amicus, he made Asylum, Vault of Horror, and now The Screaming Starts. He also made another film with Hammer, Moon 02, which was an early episode of Mystery Science Theater. The movie itself was credited as being written by Robert Bloch. Now, Bloch became influenced by H.P. Lovecraft while reading the anthology magazine Weird Tales. He ended up writing his own stories for various magazines. One thing he liked playing around with, it was Jack the Ripper as an eternal being who remains immortal via sacrifices. It's a very distinct thing that belongs almost exclusively to Bloch as a writer, and it's been toyed with ever since by other writers or other story ideas. That even led to him writing 3 Star Trek episodes, one of which is one of my favorite episodes, What Are Little Girls Made Of? Then he made a spooky Halloween tale called Cat's Paw, and then Wolf in the Fold, which used his very own Jack the Ripper eternal immortal being thing that Nurse Disembody made fun of not that long ago when we watched Terror at London Bridge.
I'm not surprised you found a way to bring Star Trek into this episode.
Of course, Star Trek always finds a way. Bloch worked a lot in writing and with scripts for TV and film, but his greatest contribution to the world is writing the book that would later be turned into one of the most famous and well-beloved horror films ever, and that would be Psycho. It's often said that Ed Gein was the inspiration for Bloch's creation of Norman Bates, but that is largely contested by Bloch himself. But you know what? I think I've gone as far as I can for Asylum. Nurse, provide us with your review, please.
You got it, Jeff. I'm just gonna say it. This is maybe the best movie we've ever had on this show. It's got a little bit of everything. It's got a creepy asylum. It's got a bunch of different people with different personalities and characters. We have 5 separate stories to follow that all have twists and turns and a little bit of sense of humor while still being creepy. This is a lot of fun. All the people in the cast are great. The sound effects, the music, the mood and vibe of this movie, all of it is perfect. I'm giving this movie an easy 5 poops out of 5.
Wow, the best movie we've ever had on this show.
That's what I said. I loved this movie.
Well, I'm glad. I thought this movie would land well with you. It's classy, it's well made, the music is nice and spooky and moody.
The more I think about it, you know what? I'm doing something never before done on this show.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I'm doing something unprecedented. I'm adding an extra half poop for the first 5.5 poops out of 5 ever given on this show.
Ooh, yeah, break those rules of the poop scale, Nurse Disembody.
Suck it, poop scale, you're broken.
I know, PC, she's out of control.
I'm drunk on power. What should I break next? Should I break this vase that is, for some reason, right in front of me?
I guess you can.
How about a bunch of plates that are also, for some reason, right in front of me?
Well, we might need those for the break room.
Ooh, good point. I've got a mirror.
No bad luck around here.
Okay, then I'll just break this show.
Wait, don't pull that plug.